Hey everyone, welcome to this environment for video games part 1. In this short tutorial, I want to start with the very basics and focus on several important subjects related to both composition and values and contrast and lines. I'll briefly go through what those terms mean and how they affect your composition and how they affect the way your image looks. And later down the road, we'll focus on not only interesting environments, but also to map out and create focus points that will support the whole environment for video games process. So let's get started. The first topic I wanted to talk about is lines. And what is important about lines? Obviously, everyone knows that the line is either horizontal or vertical. That's pretty obvious. You also can have curved lines and whatnot. In my understanding of lines, apart from the very obvious things we are getting here, is the lines that are created by value difference. So for instance, if we create, let's just quickly erase everything, and if we create just a box with selection and make it black, which I did by pressing Control backwards, that will mean that whenever you have selection, or if you press it without any selection, it will cover your entire screen. It will use from the swatches, you will use background color. So let's just get back here and create the black box. Now the difference in value will create a line. So you can see that on the edge of white and black color you have a line. If we would, for instance, create a lasso selection like this and make it white, we're having this curved line here created by difference in value. Also, if we would just make a selection and make this a little darker, so Control L to open the levels window, and let's make it like this. Now we have lines here and lines here and also here. Basically, any difference in value will create a line. That would be major takeaway. Let's just copy it here so we have it on the side as a reference for all the things we're talking about. Now the same thing goes to hues. Let's open in Photoshop CC 2014. There's a new window that you can open, which is color window, and from here you can select colors. Like if you would click here, you get the same sort of color picker, but just without that extra click. So let's create red box. Let's make a new layer. Let's create red box, and let's create right next to it, let's make a green box. Oops. And if you look at this, all of a sudden we have a line. There's a hue difference, and the line is created by the hue difference, but also the line is created by the value difference, which is on the edges here. So this area here, let's make a selection here, 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 and here we have lines, and we have a hue difference line here. So that line here on the edges is a value difference line, and this is hue difference line. In order to even show you and make it easier to read, if we just desaturate everything, we have a gray box. Both of those colors are the same value. However, they're just different hue. So in a scenario where you have a black and white color palette, the only lines we're gonna have are those here on the edges where there is a value difference. However, if we do have color and you start introducing new colors to your canvas, anytime you do that, you will have, oops, let's make a blue color, you will have a line. And now this can be either curved line, it can be, let's make a polygonal selection and make it yellow. It can be a diagonal line, it can be vertical or, vertical or horizontal. So that's the quick theory about lines. And if you press hue saturation again, there's obviously some artifact coming from selection here, but basically if we do a color picker, you'll see that the value is the value of the color, or the number of the color, is 80 80 80, and no matter where we click here, you'll see that it's the same value. Actually, for some reason the value slightly changed here, but the change is so minimal that you can't even notice it. But anyways, so it's probably because I made the wrong selection. I didn't go dead on this corner. But basically, you'll see that you have hue difference here, and the hue difference is creating a line. So your hue, white hue, and your yellow, your green, yellow, red, and blue, all of those are creating lines everywhere. So if we use our line tool and let's make it pink color, we have a line here. Oops, let's make it black. We have a line here, we have a line here, here, and so on and so forth. So basically, there's two ways of creating lines. Not only just by drawing a line, making curves and whatnot, but also by using values and hues to create lines. Now, the reason I'm explaining this in the very beginning, it's going to be extremely important to know the differences of those things and the fundamentals of how the lines are created, because the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we can use lines to create rhythm and to determine whether our composition is going to be dynamic or static. So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. All right, let's quickly save this for reference. Let's call it lines, and let's kill those layers, and let's save it once again, and let's call it let's call it thumbnails. All right, we can close this. We're gonna start working on thumbnails by making a grayscale. I never like to start with the white canvas, and it's usually gray color that I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna try to limit myself to use as less values as possible, basically just to make the whole process much easier for myself. I'll choose to use this very simple brush here, which is very narrow, almost square or rounded narrow brush, and it almost works like a marker. And we can also rotate it if we need it, but most likely we will just use, let's just quickly reset that. Most likely we'll just use what we have here. So I'll start with something very simple, and I'll create a landscape by just using gradients. So I'll make a selection, and I'll make a gradient like this, and then I'll make a selection just to create some sort of mountain range. I'll pick that value here, just paint it in my selection, and then I'll use selection tool and delete it just to create some sort of riverbed or something like that. Basically, could be some sort of like lake, lake kind of environment where the soil is very wet and there's a lot of lakes and maybe small rivers and whatnot. Just basically creating something real simple and without working our asses off to make something appealing. Just very basic stuff, and all I'm using is just either selections and gradients or just simple lines. I'll actually cut it down to something like this because I want to focus on the lake, or not the lake but the ground part. And once I'm done with the composition, I'll quickly explain what were my choices and why am I cropping it this way, and where do I want to land my focus and whatnot. So just quickly creating some additional range of hills and rocks, anything that just simply will help us to understand what this is. So very quick, dirty work. We don't have to go in details, and I'll just kind of use my selection by pressing Control H. You can hide selection. The selection is still here, however, you're just hiding it. It's easier to paint where you don't see those outlines here. So let's kind of like create some small detail by using paint strokes, and basically just make it look like a very simple environment. Again, just very, very, very simple stuff. And I'll quickly explain what this means to our composition. And now just what I like to do is create some sort of light directionality. So I'm assuming the light is coming from this angle. So the major source light is somewhere outside of the viewing area of the canvas. And what I'm gonna use is a clipping mask. Basically press Alt and click between layers, and now you can paint on this layer and it will act like you have this selection, which you do, by the way, by pressing Control and clicking the layer. But we don't have to have this selection. We can just create a clipping mask like this, and then whatever you paint, it's only gonna be affecting well, it's still gonna be in this layer, whatever you paint, but it will be using your previous layer or the bottom layer as a mask. So if I unlink it, you will see that I have those lines here everywhere. This is the easiest way to work, by the way, because it allows me to not put effort to control myself with what I'm doing. I can just focus on creating interesting shapes and lighting scenarios and whatnot. So just quickly doing this kind of very simple environment. Just adding a little bit of light information. Sort of indicating that this is some sort of hill here, and that kind of stuff. So we don't have to do immense amount of details on this. Just creating an impression of light. And I'm not focusing much on the detail. I'm just kind of trying to create the general composition out of it. Just cleaning up. What I like to do here, by the way, whenever I'm working on that kind of stuff, I want to make sure that my paint strokes, especially when I'm creating this sort of environment stuff, are pretty sharp. I like to maintain sharpness, and then I'll keep soft brush strokes and softer details only in areas that I will want to have less definition, and maybe just areas that suggest detail instead of being a major sort of lighting component or whatnot. Basically, what you want to focus on is you want to make sure that your light in your composition is solid, and the lines that are created by light are as sharp as possible. Unless it's a very diffuse light, then we have a different discussion. But uh, a rule of thumb, create sharp edges. So you see all those sharp edges here. They're making an impression that you have a rock surface here, and it helps to read where the light direction is coming from. But if you just, let's say, I'll just quickly make one thing where I'm blurring everything. It becomes much more softer, and it's making an impression of something totally different, and you can't really tell what it is, right? Whereas when you have this detail, you can say, okay, this is sort of like this rocky structure that is being here, and it's easier to understand what's going on. Also, when I'm painting this way, oops, now the wrong layer. When I'm painting this way, I'm kind of trying to understand where the light is coming from and suggest how it's going to cast shadow. So if we have this mound here, it'll cast shadow here on this mountain here. Let's make something like this. Let's unlink it, because what are we having here? If you zoom in or if you look at the layer, you see that parts of the layer are transparent. So whatever we're painting is actually gonna be slightly darker, and what I want to just avoid that. Or actually, you know what? It's only gonna be slightly darker on this area. What I've noticed, I have this layer that is making everything darker. So what I will do, I'll make my life easier. I'll put it on the clipping mask here, and also I can just duplicate it and move it down. Oops. Without selection, obviously. So let's duplicate it, move it down, and then put this back into the clipping mask. And now we have much more control. Let's make it slightly darker too. And let's put it on the lighten mode. So whatever we're gonna change, we're only adding light. And the lighten mode is perfect for that, because if we use black color, for instance, normally if this was a normal mode, and if I use black, you'll see it's black here. But if I go on lighten mode, the only thing it does is only the brighter value than your layer will appear, or the background to what you're painting. So if I'm gonna paint this value here, it's not gonna affect this area here. It will affect this area here, obviously, because this area is darker. But if I use darker values here, you see it's almost like erasing. Let's just merge it down here and merge it down here as well. Make our lives easier. And I'm just doing a really simple brush strokes to kind of try to suggest that this surface here is more leaning towards camera. So we're having this kind of mountain that goes circular around towards the camera, and this kind of giving us the good impression of that. And we can kind of erase just to add a little atmospherics. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna add a little mountain range here as well, just to kind of balance our composition. And I'll explain in a second what I'm trying to do here. I'll just kind of use selection here. It's going to be easier than finding a sharp eraser and using it to erase stuff. And I'll take this here and I'll try to create a little bigger mound like that. And I'll use gradient and sort of gradient stuff in. And then I can use this as a normal layer and paint on top. So we're kind of using a reverse, almost like reverse engineering. Oops, it's that layer here. I need to take this here as well because for some reason I had it unlinked and we don't want that. So it's kind of like playing around and seeing what feels good. Oops. Just trying to find the right detail. Again, as you see, I'm trying to keep everything pretty simple. And by the way, I'm not looking at any reference, so whatever you're looking at might be totally wrong. It doesn't matter. We're kind of working on the composition first, and I want to explain to you in a second what we're gonna do here. Just want to finish this real quick. Shouldn't take much more time, probably a minute more or two, and we're gonna be good to go. Let's make something like that, and let's gradient. I'll use this gradient here. So we kind of adding in, oops, I don't want a gradient on the background layer. I want a gradient on the new layer. Creating new layer, click here, or control new, oh sorry, that's the new file. Anyways, just click the new layer there. Making gradient, I'm gonna squeeze it down. By the way, by default, this option, show transform controls, is not on. I like to have it on. If you don't have it on, it's gonna be a little more it's gonna require a little more clicks to do transformations, and I hate that. So I like to have the transformation box on, and if I'm annoyed by those box helpers here because I don't see how it's transforming, I'm just gonna press Ctrl H and it's hidden, and then Ctrl H to kind of show it back again. So easy way to get rid of the controlling boxes, and easiest way to work this way, because let's imagine we don't have, if we press V for movement and transformations, if I don't have it here, I can only move it around, and whatever I want to do with the transformation, I need to right click. Oops. Right click exactly where the layer is, select the layer, and I don't know how to fucking do it. So I always have it on because it's easier, and I don't know how to transform without having it on. I'm just too stupid for that and never used it otherwise in a different way. So sorry for that. It's my habit and the way I work, and it's gonna be much more helpful for you if you use these controls. Unless you have a better way of doing it, then go ahead and use it by all means. I'm not an expert in this field. I think I still have to learn quite a lot, even though I did already quite a few projects, bigger ones, and I can say I have a pretty good experience in video games. However, there are better masters in Photoshop tools than me, so Um, whatever you feel gonna work for you, you should use it. I use it that way, and I'm suggesting it so that it's gonna be easier if you work that way. And let's maybe add a little mound here, or maybe here. Here will be a great spot. And again, just kind of painting in those highlights. All right. I think this is good enough, and maybe just for sake of readability, I will create a layer mask, adjustment layer mask, and increase the contrast so you can see a little bit more what's going on. And now I'll talk composition and lines. And one thing that I want to talk about first is the way I use composition. There's two ways of creating, or two major ways of creating a composition. First one is if you go ahead and create. Let's make our life super easy. Control R will bring the ruler, and then if you click and grab, you can create this little helper line. And if you go snap and you just press snap, now we're gonna use line tool, which is U. I can snap it to this ruler line, and if I press V and then move it back to those rulers here, it will disappear. Basically what I did here is Control R is enable and disable the ruler, and then Control H is enable and disable the bounding box, or it's called actually extras. You can see Control H for extras and Control R for ruler. I use it just to create, just to be sure where is my center, and I just wanted to create a line in the dead center. Now your first and the probably most simple composition would be where everything is symmetrical. So it's this kind of composition would be limited to very specific scenarios, and you're not gonna use it too often. But basically what it would mean is you're having this kind of scenario where you clearly have your middle line, or the center line, and then everything else is not necessarily mirroring, but it's creating this effect of having one point, first of all, one point perspective and focus in the middle. And I think the easiest way to show you how this could kind of look like would be if I all of a sudden do things like this. Just very simple, kind of weird. I just want to make it look real weird. Let's just make a wall like this. I'm gonna use gradients so it looks nicer. And then we can create those kind of mechanical lines. So if you click with your brush anywhere, you click once, you press shift, and then you click elsewhere, you'll create a straight line, depending on the brush, by the way. So some brushes will work perfectly for this, some not. For this brush it works perfectly, and I can, by just holding shift and pressing and just pressing my cursor in different areas, I can create those straight lines like that. Super easy. I'll make the cursor smaller. Kind of adding this perspective effect. Something like this. We don't have to go really fancy. And then I'll just make it mirror like that. Let's merge it. Let's create a ground here. This is, by the way, perfect way to create new thumbnail, where you just start from something that exists and create something totally new. So what I'm creating here is just like this corridor. I'm kind of eyeballing where the perspective line would go. I mean, you can create your grid and make perspective, just nail perspective perfectly, but I don't care about that too much right now. I just want to create something to show you the one point perspective composition. And let's make the top here something darker, like this. Can create, again, it doesn't have to be perfectly mirroring, as long as you're focusing on the one point perspective. So I'm not really focusing on any particular design. I'm just kind of trying to create an interesting, just trying to make my point, pretty much. And the easiest way is to do it this way. Oops, let's just make a gradient like this. Duplicate like so. Let's make it darken. Let's use soft brush to erase the middle like that, and then you can kind of add like a ceiling light. I'll use it by line tool. It's gonna be quicker and more accurate. And I want to add like reflections that are like kind of fading away, making my walls a little more reflective, I would say. Which is a very simple trick. I'll talk a little bit more about how this reflections really work later down the road, when we go to a little more advanced stuff. Right now, just discussing composition. Just a simple corridor. Almost looked like something from Doom, from the very first game, where the very old school game where everything was pretty low res and you didn't have too much of things going on, and Just kind of trying to add a little more dimension to the environment. Again, maybe just getting rid of some of those lines and creating a maybe like a plate here. Something really simple. Just to prove the point what I'm talking about, I'm just gonna merge everything together. So we have our second composition. Basically, this is 1 point, 1 point perspective composition, and also it's I call it centric or symmetrical. Basically, what it means is you're focusing only on 1 point, and everything is kind of coming to that very middle. I rarely use it because it requires a very specific environment, and also it's not really that useful when it comes down to how you would paint it in video games. So for instance, if you would be creating environment for a level, this kind of perspective probably not going to be too useful, mainly because the second kind of perspective that I use a lot will definitely help to create not maybe more interesting, but more balanced image in terms of how it presents itself as an illustration, and also how it's used as a source for your designers and other artists to as a reference for designers and artists. So the second composition that I wanted to talk about is the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds is very simple composition. When I press crop, it basically shows what this composition is. It's basically you're creating the points of interest around those 4 dots here. And maybe it's not so successful here. You would probably have to like do this kind of cropping to have it exactly those like little rocks on the rule of thirds. But basically my horizon line is very close to where this line is, and the rule of thirds mean that you'll create your points of interest around those 4 points here, but also majority of the lines, or the most the lines that will be the most dividing or will have the most contrast, will be on those lines that are dividing the image in three equal portions, whether it's vertically or horizontally. So for instance, my horizon line is where this line is here, and my major part of the sort of lake river, it's not exactly spot on. It doesn't have to be, as long as it's very close, and maybe majority of it is close to that line, and it is. So basically my horizon line, even though we have mountains here, you can still kind of guess that the horizon line is very close to where this line is, and then this line here is creating the second kind of like line here. And also those 2 rocks are aligning almost perfectly here. Those 2 rocks here are a little bit off, but it doesn't have to be dead on those points. Basically what I would do, for instance, if I wanted to paint some kind of castle or something, I would use the crop and then create my sort of guiding line. And then what you would want to do is you would paint your structure, say here. So if that was a castle, like that, we can hide this line here. So if it's like an abandoned castle tower or something that is like on the riverbed, it will be right here, right where the center is. Let's just quickly create or fake reflection here. Just move it down there. What you basically want to have is anytime you're using water, you want to have a reflection, and it's better to make it a little darker. Maybe not so dark. Something like this. And maybe less contrasty, because that's gonna work better for reflection. And actually, if you think about it, these mountains would definitely be oops, it's probably too dark. Let's make it on the darken layer, but let's just brighten it up a little bit. Let's put it here on top. It's gonna be easier to control. Like they would definitely, let's remove that layer for a second because it's screwing up everything. Like there would be some kind of reflection of those mountains on those river. And you can make it slightly brighter actually if it's towards the background. There's a Fresnel effect that is making the reflections a little different here. But that should work. But basically, yeah, so if I would want to add structure here, actually gonna make it less transparent just to suggest, and just gonna use eraser, and I'm gonna use the same brush to create like a river current and make it look more like it's really a reflection. Same here. Something like this. So basically, if you would put your structure, it would be here, where the rule of thirds lines are appearing, and that's creating a compelling composition. We could actually make this structure much larger, but basically I just painted to prove the point that that's probably the best area to place your focus point. We can actually even make a trick like this, make it even more sort of visually appealing. Just kind of doing a little extra work here. Like so. Let's make it even darker like this so it stands out more. But basically that's the major sort of composition rule that I would use, the rule of thirds. I use it for 90% of my paintings. Again, you can use this sort of symmetrical perspective. Also, there's one more perspective rule, or not perspective, composition rule, which is let me find the word for it. It's gonna be oops, I think it's called rule of odds. I might be wrong. You can check Wikipedia for it, but basically what it means is like you're creating parts of the environment that are not necessarily anywhere near to your third lines, the dividing lines, and what you want to do is just kind of balance your existing objects to so I'm gonna make like this huge rock formation here, and I'll show you what I mean by balancing it with other formations in the image. Just gonna make it slightly more contrasty, like this. So basically you're just eyeballing and putting some kind of object that will create balance in the image. So your eye is not leaning towards one specific object. It's actually gonna kind of balance itself and like not jump around too much. I should probably put a disclaimer here that I'm not academic in terms of art, and everything I'm talking is self-taught from just looking at other people's work and looking at advice from other professionals, and also the experience I have both in video games and film. And the majority of what I'll be talking about is really my own experiences and how I implement those experiences to my line of work. And I feel that with the amount of experience I have in both video games and film, I can talk about some maybe not strictly academic, but still kind of artistic rules that apply to your compositions, and will definitely help you to create something that is visually appealing. So yeah, I'm creating this kind of odds everywhere where the rocks are more scattered. There's some empty space here, but basically still you have sort of like the balance of everything. And even though this maybe like this rock could be slightly bigger, and that composition here, that's probably something that you'll find using in video games more often too, especially that creating a composition for a concept, it's definitely going to help you in terms of like creating an image that looks beautiful and maybe sells the idea. However, you'll find yourself working with levels that already exist and being built in 3D by either environment artists, or you will get block mesh from your designer. And then that block mesh will determine where those objects are, and maybe sometimes you'll get a screenshot of the game and you'll have to do overpaint of that screenshot, and the composition is not gonna look good at all, but still it's your job to create environment, not the illustration. So that's the major difference in terms of like how you would approach environments in video games. All right. So this is the sort of third composition we have, and I'll maybe start doing something like this, just to have all of them in the separate sort of layers. When you press Shift Control Alt E, it will create a layer on top of your currently selected layer by merging every visible layer in your file. So if I would want to create this image in like a separate layer, but I had this on, then even if I choose my layer here and press Control Shift Alt and E, it will add, you see, it will add this information from that layer to my existing layer, and this layer will almost like duplicate on top of this. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that we are having everything above our currently selected layer, this not visible, and then we're just merging visible. And we have our first composition, merge visible because we have an empty space here, or actually not, we actually did that before. So we have our second composition, and then let's disable this mountain here, and here we will have our third composition. So I'll just make sure I have all those three on top of my file, and if you open the file, we'll have access to everything. So this is the first composition, rule of thirds, second composition, symmetry, and the third composition, which is very similar to the first one. We kind of just elaborated by adding some extra rocks, which is the rule of odds. And those are three major rules for that I'll be using for creating thumbnails. And three major kind of rules for most of my environments, and I'll use it anytime I have a possibility or chance to implement it in the concept. Next up, in the next tutorial that I'll be releasing soon, I'll be talking about the subject of lines again. So when I go back to this file here, let's actually cut it down to this, so you don't have all that white space here. Save it, and I'll talk about how the lines and the directionality of lines and curvature of lines and whatnot is affecting your composition in terms of how you read it in terms of emotions. So for instance, just gonna briefly show you or talk about an example of that. Hold on, just quickly gonna do one thing. Let's make this composition here without the tower, and let's make it as our final composition. I'm gonna keep the tower here so you have it. I just kind of like it more empty like that. Anyways, so what I'll talk about is, and I did it just to kind of prove the point that I'll be talking about later, which is the lines. How the directionality of line will affect the way you read the image, and when and at which situation you should use different kind of lines to create more static or more dynamic composition. And one of the example, quickly just to tell you the usage, is the differences in values here that I've created by having my river and having my mountain are creating horizontal lines, and horizontal lines mean static image. So that's what we're gonna do in the next lesson. I hope you enjoyed this one so far. It's a very basic stuff. It's based on my experiences that I've gathered over last almost or over 10 years in both video games and film industry. And this whole big project that we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks is we'll be creating a post-apocalyptic environment, sci-fi environment, and I'll be showing you all the techniques that I use when I'm creating environments for video games. So very similar to techniques that I used to create environments for games such as The Last of Us or Crysis and Crysis 2, those big titles. And I'll be explaining the pitfalls of some of those techniques and how to improve your workflow, what kind of brushes to use when it's necessary to paint, and when you should supposed to stop painting and start photo bashing maybe, when it's important to use 3D, how to read feedback from your designers, and how to make sure that your environment is actually useful for both designers and artists, and what your environment can tell in terms of the game production in general. So those are the sort of bullet points of what we will be talking about over the next several weeks, and or hopefully sooner. It just comes down to how much time I will have to create those tutorials, but this one's the first, which is just lines and composition rules. And the second one, I'll discuss how the lines are affecting your composition in terms of whether it's static, dynamic, and whatnot. And we'll talk about camera a little more, and all those topics that are important for creating appealing compositions. Thanks for watching this, and see you soon with the next tutorial.